Hello, everybody. This is Larry Matty. I'm one of the co-founders of Serum Exchange, and we welcome you to the webcast Heard But Not Seen. Why can't you ignore your IVR anymore? Or why you can't ignore your IVR anymore? Our presenter today is Joe Alwyn, who's the Vice President and General Manager of AVOKE Caller Experience Analytics at Raytheon BBN Technologies. Joe was previously Vice President and GM of Call Center Solutions at Empirics, and has 25 years of experience turning technology innovation into practical business solutions. Our host company, Raytheon BBN Technologies, is a legendary R&D organization that develops groundbreaking technologies such as the first large vocabulary speaker independent speech recognizer, the first natural language call router, and the first automated directory assistance system. By leveraging these innovations, BBN brings to market advanced products such as AVOKE Analytics. AVOKE provides IVR, speech, and call flow analytics in an IT-free solution. Unlike any other solution available in the market today, AVOKE is the only one that captures and analyzes an entire call from start to finish. BBN is a wholly owned subsidiary of Raytheon Technologies, or Raytheon Company, which employs over 72,000 people worldwide. Before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping items. We will be doing a question and answer session after Joe's presentation. Please send us the questions through the Q&A box on the lower right-hand side of your screen and avoid using the chat box. We will also be sending you a survey after Joe's presentation. Your input is extremely important to us, so we would appreciate it if you fill it out and send it back to us. And now here's Joe. Joe?
Well, Larry, thank you very much, and thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Amazing response. Just so you know, we have nearly 100 people joining us today, and I think that's just, more evidence that people are sort of thinking about the IVR again. Seems to me that the focus and technology kind of goes in waves, and what we've detected among our customers is sort of a renewed interest in what's happening in the IVR, and that's kind of why we picked the topic today. So what we're going to cover is sort of what's changed and how are people feeling about IVR. There's a really interesting new study. I'm going to share with you some results about consumer attitudes towards IVR. Some of the results are a little hard to see, but we'll walk through those, and then we'll talk about, what can be done, what are leading-edge companies doing about the situation in order to figure out how to get maximum value out of the IVR. So, of course, when IVR arrives and the promise of the IVR, and we hear this today from all of the providers of IVR solutions, premise-based, cloud-based, regardless, is that the IVR is the front door. It's the place where the customer gets this first impression. They give you a call, and the IVR and the way it interacts with the customer hopefully reflects your brand values, and it sort of reinforces the brand in the way that the customer has that first interaction in their contact with your company. And the job of the IVR then is what? It's to get that person to the agent who's going to help them and make that happen quickly. Maybe offload some tasks from the agents. We can ID the customer, understand what their basic need might be, and we can, if we can take a few tasks off the agent's hands, do that in the IVR, present that information to the agent, then we can actually reduce handle time. And of course, with self-service tasks in the IVR, we might even be able to help both the customer and our call center. The customer gets an answer more quickly without having had to wait in queue, and we have fewer agent calls offered, so the call center runs more efficiently. Obviously, a fantastic business proposition. In fact, honestly, that's one of the things that bothers me so much is, you can see how IVR can be so powerful, and yet we see that the reality today is that consumers have just sort of really developed a negative reaction to IVRs. And, I find myself asking, what have we done as an industry to take this incredibly important and potentially, very valuable technology and turn it into something that, people are so universally unhappy with, it seems. So here's a new study, and this one just came out in May. And this was a survey of over 2,000 consumers. I forgot the exact number, but something like that. And the demographics were good. It was a cross-representation of ages and different demographic groups. And I thought what was just remarkable was 36% said that IVRs have gotten worse over the time that we've all been trying to make them better. I mean, we have, we have some analytics. Some companies are using IVR analytics, not too many. Reporting has gotten, I don't know, a little better. But certainly we've thrown speech into IVRs. We've done we've played with different personas and different approaches to voice talent. And so much work has gone into IVR systems, and the view is that they've just gotten worse. So actually a third or so say they've gotten worse. A third say all of that work that we've been doing has had no value. They've remained unchanged. So that is, to me that was, maybe that's something we kind of knew, but to get those kind of numbers, right in front to kind of tell you that's how consumers are feeling was to me a little difficult. And it's also just gotten into the popular culture. I mean, people joke about IVRs. You can see this one on the left here, this, the bank branch, trying to figure out how to get people to use the phone instead of come to the branch. And so they put a keypad on the branch door that says, to come into the branch, please type in your 40-digit, account number followed by the pound sign, and the consumer is, screaming. Or on the right, I don't know how many of you have seen this. This is probably one of my favorite Seinfeld episodes where George calls to find out movie information, and Kramer is pretending to be an IVR. He's welcome to movie phone, and that's a great skit. But it's even, I've even seen people now that change their business titles on their business cards because they kind of don't want to say their IVRs. So you see all kinds of, I'm in charge of self-service, I'm in charge of voice self-service, I'm in charge of the voice portal. It's kind of like, I don't know. To me, it's, it's an indication that, maybe we're not, maybe there's an opportunity for more improvement in how we use IVR and making IVR a partner with the contact center to service customers, and making the IVR be something that customers understand helps them get service, as opposed to something that prevents them from getting to somebody who's going to give them service. So the same survey that told us that consumers feel that IVRs have gone nowhere or gotten worse, asked consumers, what do you do when you have a company that has a bad IVR experience? Nearly 80% said that they make an effort to avoid companies that have a difficult IVR experience. 30% said they have taken the time to tell the company that the IVR is bad. So you think about that. That's interesting. How do they tell the company? Do they send an email? Do they mention it in chat? Well, more often than not, they're telling the agent, right? So they get to the agent and they spend some time telling the agent about how bad the IVR was. And that's really horrible. We're now actually adding to handle time because consumers feel the need to share their pain with the agent. And then 43% shared their bad IVR experience with others. And I think that's a little scarier now than it used to be because we have social media. We have vehicles whereby, these shared ideas can sort of take on a life of their own. They can become bigger. They can influence others. And so, we have a situation where consumers feel that IVRs are not helpful. They've gotten worse. And they're in a position now where they're, starting to, it impacts their choices about who they do business with. And they're using, the new ways to share information with others. And so that I think is perhaps, another reason to pay more attention to the IVR because, a bad experience in the IVR in any channel can be a lot more damaging and impactful today because of the reach of social media and the impact that people can have. So I think it's an interesting question to ask. How in the world did we get here? How did we turn something that is potentially so valuable and so potentially powerful if done right? How did we get here? And I have to admit right away, this is perfect hindsight, right? And I'm sure these aren't all of the factors. In fact, as I was thinking about this slide, I thought, there's one other factor, which has just been cost-cutting pressure. Many of us have been forced to kind of push things into the IVR because the organization is just doing everything possible to reduce agent-handled volume, and that includes, the expense of customer satisfaction, really forcing or enforcing, IVR interactions. So I think there's organizational pressure to essentially take choice away from consumers and require them to do things in the IVR, and I think that certainly has been a factor. But I do think there's some things as an industry that we've done, and this first quote was one of my favorite ones from my dad, to a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And I think, to a certain degree, to a speech recognizer, everything looks like a speech problem. If you make your living designing IVRs and consulting with companies about building IVRs and writing IVR application code and selling IVR software, I mean, you're all better off if companies build bigger, more complex IVRs. And so, sort of the industry sort of encourages us to do more in the IVR because that's more consulting, more software development, more IVR licenses, and everything that the industry is, wanting to push for their own revenue purposes. The other thing that we certainly see is this cognitive bias, which is known as the curse of knowledge. It's the being so knowledgeable about something that you can't see it from another perspective. And we see all the time that, if we don't have the right separation of duties, right, if we don't have different people or parties involved in governance and strategy, UI design, application development, then, you end up with people who are so close to the process that they sort of can't see the problems. And we see, language creep into IVR menus that is internal language that is patently obvious and universally understood by those working at the company and completely unintelligible to customers. So that certainly is a problem. And I think the other issue is just a visibility issue. We're sort of deep in the IVR, and we have a limited visibility of what's going on in the IVR. We essentially have application log data, and we have limited ability to really follow things after they leave the IVR. And so I think limited visibility is a factor as well. And so what does this mean? Let's get to more numbers. And in this case, this is real measurements of IVR systems. And we actually do a benchmarking process. We call it the customer effort index. It's a standard set of measurements. So, one of the problems I have with benchmarking in general is that when you ask, 25 companies to tell me the self-service rate, and then you try to compare who has better self-service than somebody else, before long you find out that those 25 companies each have a different definition for self-service rate. And so, that's, I think, one of the huge problems with benchmarking is that companies have different ways to measure metrics with the same name. And so we kind of get past that because we have the measure, we have the yardstick, we have the ruler. And so, if we have the measuring instrument, then we get to measure it the same way everywhere. And here's what we're seeing. 28% of customers are opting out, though an opt-out option is not presented. So that's an unsolicited opt-out. Nowhere in the application do we say that you can press 0 or you can say agent or you can say representative, but they're doing it anyway. Nearly a third of callers, are essentially screaming to be let out of the IVR, even though that's not been presented to them as an option. 22% of IVRs actually collect data successfully from the customer, but then fail to pass it on to the agent. And, that's a huge missed opportunity, right? We're doing a really valuable step in successfully collecting information in the IVR, and yet we're missing the opportunity to save agent labor with that data. And not only are we missing the opportunity to save agent labor, we're also really frustrating the customer. One of the top gripes in customer satisfaction surveys and feedback is having to provide the same information more than once. Here's one that I think is pretty, scary, which is hanging up unresolved in the IVR. These are calls that end in the IVR. They are contained. And getting back to those metrics, some companies actually celebrate containment. Here's a case where 18% of the call volume hangs up in the IVR with no service, no information provided, no transaction completed, nothing done. That's an unresolved call in the IVR, and I don't think that's anything anybody should be too happy about. Then of course, classic misdrop problems. We transfer the call to the wrong agent. They have to transfer the call to another agent. That's a problem. Failed self-service, customers actually investing time, and then reprompt. So, there's just specific data, explaining, I think, why we saw those consumer reactions in the beginning here about people feeling that they, don't like IVR systems and avoid companies with VoIP companies that have systems that do these things. So let's talk now about impact on workforce management. I mean, those metrics are essentially IVR metrics, but what does that mean to the call center? And I had a really interesting conversation with a contact center leader about 2 weeks ago who said, the IVR can really mess up what you're trying to do in workforce management and performance management. Because, in workforce management, we are trying to manage a certain expected volume of calls offered and a certain handle time. And if my IVR is essentially artificially increasing or needlessly, avoidably increasing calls offered, that's basically fighting workforce management. It's trying to find ways to reduce calls offered. And if the IVR, as you can see, some of these issues actually drive handle time up, others drive handle time down. Both are kind of an issue because, the whole point of our team that's working on scheduling and workforce planning is we have an assumption about what our handle time is, and based on that, we build a schedule and we have an expectation for what service levels are going to be. And if we suddenly have take the first one, if we suddenly have a lot of unsolicited opt-outs, those calls are going to go right to agents. They are probably going to be, a number of those are going to be short transactions that could have been self-served, but they weren't self-served because the caller jumped out of the IVR. So if we increase the number of self-servable calls that land in our agent queues, we're basically increasing the volume of short calls. We're pulling AHT down. Now, maybe that's good because AHT is coming down, but maybe it's not because calls offered is going up. So maybe we'd rather not have the call than have another, shorter than average handle time call. So the IVR has a direct impact on workforce management and scheduling and setting goals and expectations for critical KPIs like service level. Now, how are other channels? Here's an interesting idea or thought, a comparison, which is how are other channels handling this? And I think the website is a really interesting example. If we go back for a moment, imagine we were looking at these metrics on the website. The number of customers that were abandoning shopping carts, that hanging up unresolved, for example, basically hit one page and leave. I mean, the web team focuses a lot on this kind of data, and if your website had that sort of issue, it would be fixed, right? So we have, I think it's an interesting comparison to look at the sorts of tools and techniques that web teams are using and try to figure out, what can we learn from maybe the way other channels are handling this kind of stuff. And this is essentially abstracted from, some of the stuff that Gartner publishes and some of the things that you can see on the websites of the firms that offer web analytics tools. But they generally talk about a process that's driven by data coming from the website and from the application log. We monitor at the top here KPIs that describe customer experience. So that's the customer experience stuff. And then site processes here is essentially transactional data. So shopping carts, forms filled out, et cetera. And then with that data, we can prioritize what to work on. And then we can, pour in and figure out why are things happening, and then go make changes and kind of keep going in this loop. So that's sort of what the web teams are doing for, the highest performing, really business critical sort of websites. And if you look at the set of tools they essentially have 3 tools. They have kind of classic web analytics, which is essentially, taking application of web logs and making them, visualizing web log data. Web replay is probably one of the most powerful tools, the ability to actually replay essentially a movie of what the visitor's trip was like on the website, and then classic, APM tools to make sure the infrastructure is running. And so I think there's an interesting, we already have 2 interesting areas of comparison. Do we have in the IVR a cycle that looks like this, right? And do we have in the IVR a set of tools that's comparable to what the web team is using? And I think in many cases we'll find that perhaps we don't have a comparable set of practices and methodologies for IVR that we do for web. Another really interesting quote, and actually I updated this and I forgot to get this date here. This actual quote is from August of this year. It's from an actually even newer note from Gartner. But regarding web replay, this idea that you can actually get a movie of somebody navigating your website. Gartner said, be prepared to shatter assumptions and deal with wounded egos. I thought that was amazing. Basically what they're saying is, with web analytics and application performance management, you really don't know what's happening and what users are doing on your website until you get the ability to actually replay sessions, and then the truth is revealed. And sometimes that can have all kinds of ramifications. People can feel that they have a great running website and everything's good, and then you get a web replay solution in there, and you can see that maybe things aren't working the way you expect. Obviously, that can be tricky for an organization to accept and deal with. So I think the question is, can we take this sort of methodology and can we borrow from other channels and think about, what to do in the IVR? And of course, our experience would say absolutely. And in fact, if you're not doing it, it's probably overdue that you do. It's very easy to come up with task metrics for the IVR. That's not a tricky thing. I mean, we know identification rates. We know self-service rates, customer effort metrics, right? We can easily separate contained calls into two categories, those that end without having gotten anything done versus those that end after self-service. So we can see that the callers that end with no productive value, and that's clearly a lot of effort for no return. So we can come up with customer effort metrics. And if we have some metrics, we have the data to prioritize. If we have something like web replay, we can actually understand root cause. And I think the whole thing about the IVR is doing this cycle in a way that we keep track of really the two reasons for having an IVR in the first place. And that is to get the call to the right place and to get some work done in order to service the customer more quickly, or take some time and labor and effort away from the agent. So, as long as we stay focused on those two things, sort of the primary, most fundamental reason for having an IVR to start with, and if we put everything through that filter, do the metrics tell us that we're having greater success at low customer effort to get the call to the right place and do self-service? So that sort of focus, along with a process like this, I think can go a long way. The one thing that we find has to be sort of colored in this, and this is really unique for each company, is where do you sit in the continuum of sort of high touch, high customer service versus low cost. We do find that what people want to do in the IVR is directly related to the central value proposition that the company provides. And here, I'll illustrate the extremes just to make the point. If you define yourself as a low-cost producer in your industry, in the product and service that you provide, the role you play is efficiency and the low-cost provider and value, then you might want to be a little more forceful in keeping customers in the IVR to get things done. You want to err on the side of maintaining your service delivery costs at a low level so that you can continue to have the cost structure to be a low-cost provider in your marketplace. On the other extreme, there are companies that say, no, we're not the cheapest product around, but we're the best customer service solution around. And we're a high-touch company. We're the company that cares. We're the company that's there for you. We're the premium product, the premium service. Those companies tend to want to design the IVR in a way that's friendlier, maybe that makes it easier for companies to get out. But in either case, once you know where you sit on that continuum, and there's a sort of an understanding and agreement, then you can apply a strategy like this to make these decisions and implement changes, evaluate your position on these metrics versus other companies in the context of where you want to be on that continuum. So, what are these metrics? Well, there's a set of metrics that we've found to be useful over the years, and you can pretty easily divide them into these two categories, right? What metrics are all about task success, and what metrics are all about customer effort. And so we've talked about a few of these. On the task success side, identification rate, and again, if you go back to where you want to be on sort of low cost, sort of maybe a little more forcefully drive completion in the IVR versus if you want to be on the, high customer service, let them out anytime you want in the interest of customer service, you might have different identification strategies, right? Depending on where you are in that continuum, you might ID at the very top of your application, or you might ID later on down into a self-service module. But identification rate can be measured. It's a task, and if the data is transferred to an agent, it's a real time saver in the call center. Arguably, actually, if you're not going to pass the data to the agent, you shouldn't even bother to collect it in the IVR, but unfortunately, too many companies do. So the ID rate, self-service first call resolution. So this is essentially calls that receive self-service in the IVR, and then the call ends normally in the IVR, indicating the customer, got their question answered and they're happy. There's self-service to an agent. This is an interesting category. These are calls where customers do accomplish self-service in the IVR and then go to an agent anyway. So, that basically, these are customers that are willing to play, but for some reason weren't fully satisfied. So there's usually an opportunity there to enhance self-service. If you realize what bit about that answer wasn't quite satisfactory, if we can figure that out, we can actually enhance self-service. Correct routing is vital. Make sure that we're not generating transfers by giving calls to the wrong skill. And then this is an interesting one, advertised opt-out. So, we tend to think that opt-outs are a bad thing. But when we present it as an option, even like maybe the first option, and we encourage customers to say, you can opt out at any time, well, choosing that opt-out, honestly, I think there's a good argument to be made that is success. You've given that as an option, the customer chose it. So, that's exactly what you designed by presenting that option in the menu. Maybe I've seen it, be the very first thing that people say in the IVR is, you can opt out any time, and you know what? Most people do. On the effort side, people that invest time in self-service and don't get anything done, folks that scream to get out of the IVR even though we've not told them they can get to an agent, folks that have so many errors in the IVR that the IVR basically kicks them out, people that essentially hang up in the IVR trying to navigate the application and essentially just give up. They can't get done what they want to get done. They can't get to the right skilled description that matches their question. They can't make progress in the self-service application, and they just say screw it and hang up the phone. Those are tough. Terminated by the IVR. This is a category that exists, and many people don't realize the extent that it exists in their system. These are calls that your IVR terminates. So if the call ended not because a dropped cell phone, not because the customer hung up the phone, because the IVR hung up on the customer. Pretty horrible thing to happen, and happens with alarming frequency. Where this happens a lot actually is where you've got outsourced IVR infrastructure, because if you outsource call handling or IVR infrastructure, the infrastructure is A, more complex, and B, less transparent, and this may be happening more than you know. Multiple retries, excessively long in the IVR, and customers that exhibit frustration in the IVR. Some people call this sentiment detection. There's some pretty obvious ways to know whether a customer's upset. And of course we find the best one is because they say it. And you can tell when they're cursing or saying something back at the IVR system, we know they're upset. So, a set of metrics, there's others that companies use. This is a set that we've found to be particularly helpful. So, you may look at a bunch of those metrics and say, you know what, I can get those metrics out of my IVR reports. I mean, my IVR reports will tell me if customers opt out, if they hit 2 error retries, if they complete self-service, and yet here we are with people pretty unhappy with IVR systems, and us talking about what we might do better. So let's talk about why IVR reports alone really aren't enough to get maximum value out of this incredible call automation tool that we all have the opportunity to make even more valuable for our companies. Well, certainly IVR reports, I mean, it's essentially it's log data. It's breadcrumbs left behind by your application, and depending on your application, you may have really granular logs or you may have really coarse-grained logs. And essentially, what those reports can tell you is that something's wrong. And the challenge challenge is, okay, but I need to know more. Why is it happening? Why is that happening? Why are people opting out? Why are they erroring out? Why am I getting a misrecognition? Those issues. So that's, I think, where IVR reports themselves can be challenging and don't really get to where we want to go. What we found is that the best thing to do, or maybe not the best, but a powerful thing to do is if you can have your reports tied to actual audio recordings in the IVR. Actually, I think this is the best thing to do. And you can go from an anomaly that you see in the data right to a set of calls where that anomaly is exhibited and listen to that interaction. That is like eye-opening. I mean, to instead of the recognizer telling you, well, it was a low confidence recognition, when you can hear what's going on, you kind of can determine, well, was it low confidence because it's out of vocabulary, because it's accented, because there's background noise, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What's really going on? And there's so many things that we can learn by listening to actual customers navigate the IVR application. So this is one of the most powerful things that IVR Analytics can bring is this ability to replay the IVR session. This really is this ability to have audio in here in the IVR and the ability to search and find specific calls that you want, jump right to those locations. This is really the IVR equivalent of web replay. It's the IVR equivalent of solutions like TLEAF and a bunch of others that are out there that the leading edge web teams are using to replay web sessions and see what's really going on in the web environment. But we can go even farther because when a customer leaves the IVR channel, where do they go? Well, they go to an agent, right? And so if we can actually do a little cross-channel thing here and actually follow that customer onto the agent conversation and examine what is going on in the agent conversation, that's the enormous aha moment, right? Because here is where we learn what was the customer really trying to accomplish, what was in their head as they were navigating the IVR, and we also get to learn, how did the agent handle this? And so IVR Analytics takes us from the reports, which basically just tells us what happened. We get to understand why. We get an even deeper understanding of why, and we find out, a lot of incredible insights into what the IVR could or should have done for that caller when we can actually follow that call onto the next channel. I remember speaking with an IVR manager from a large utility in Texas who said, we've made a lot of changes in the IVR. The only time we've made a big change is when we found a way to follow IVR calls all the way to agents, put the two together, and really understand what was going on. And so this is really, I think, the most powerful thing. And actually, perhaps what's really valuable is when you have this level of understanding of what the customer was doing and was trying to do, you can get to a precision fix. You get to a situation where you understand the problem well enough to say, here is exactly what is needed to do, right? It may be just changing 2 words in a menu. It may be restructuring an entire dialogue flow. It may be adding a self-service transaction or enhancing a self-service information readout. But you get to a deep enough level of understanding that the solution is specific, and you make a specific fix for that specific solution, and that sort of specific fix also has another fantastic benefit, which is you're specific enough that you can actually forecast how well you expect it to work, and therefore how much business value the company is going to get by making that change. So, what if we don't have that, right? What if we don't have this ability to replay sessions of the IVR and follow IVR sessions onto agents? Well, then we do what we find to be fairly common, which is, something's wrong. Well, let's talk to some folks and figure out how others have dealt with this issue, and from that we'll have 3 or 4 solutions, and we'll socialize those and figure out the ones that we can agree on, and we'll make those changes, and we'll see if that makes it better. It's kind of like the usual suspects, and I've seen this in action where the IVR partner, the speech vendor says, well, here's the 3 things we usually do for that problem. And to me, whenever somebody says, here's the 3 things that we usually do, what they really mean is, we don't really understand exactly what's going on, so we're going to throw 3 darts, and these are the 3 that usually hit something. I think there's an opportunity with analytics to get a deeper understanding of the issues, a deeper understanding of customer behavior, a deeper understanding of how your application behaves and is experienced by your customers, so you can get past the, here's the likely suspects. We can get to a level where we say, here's exactly what's going on, here's exactly what we need to do to fix it. All right, so this all sounds great, but, if you're in an environment where you don't have the ability to replay, audio sessions in the IVR, and it's difficult, and you don't have the ability to connect those IVR replays to agent recordings, how are you going to do this? And this could sound like a big technology project to instrument the system and put in a big new capability to provide analytics. And we've actually built a capability that takes the IT headache out of it. And sometimes we call it a cloud solution, but it's only partially accurate. I mean, it's really, first of all, we do data collection in the phone network. So as you can kind of see here, essentially we put our system as the man in the middle, right? We're in between your customers and you. Instead of putting our system at your contact center and stitching it into all of your infrastructure, we just sit in the phone network. And since we're in the phone network, we're in an ideal position to record everything. To record the IVR session, to record every agent it might go to. It doesn't matter if your IVR is hosted, provided by a partner on your premise. It doesn't matter where the agents are. Since we're in the phone network, we get it all. And then we can do something really cool. We can actually build a data set by analyzing that audio. And one of the things that we've heard about analytic solutions in general is this problem of ingestion. And okay, I misspelled it here, indigestion, but sometimes I hear ingestion, and when I really hear the customers describing is indigestion. This challenge of extracting all this information from all of our systems and feeding it into some sort of a data warehouse. That data ingestion process can be very resource intensive. And so what we have developed is a solution that avoids all of that, because in place of extracting data from your systems, we extract it from the audio recording. And so we've got this whole pipeline that takes audio recordings and pulls out different pieces of information. Essentially, we build an IVR log just by recognizing prompts that occur in the call. So we have our own generated log that replaces the need to go into your IVR and pull out actual application logs. That has a great flexibility. We can actually go back in time, and we can instrument calls that already happened. You can add more granularity wherever you want without having to push a new release of your application. That extract, transform, load process to get data from all of your systems, and then having to maintain all those data links. All of that's gone. So it's just a different way to do it. And we actually provide that in a software as a service. So not only do we record in the network, but the application is provided in the cloud. And as you might imagine, there's a whole set of services that come with that. So let's walk through 2 examples now of how this really works and really works with companies. And then we'll certainly have, it looks like 15 minutes or so to take questions. And if you have questions, now would be a great time to go to that Q&A panel and type them in. Larry, who introduced us at the beginning here, is collecting those questions, and we'll go through those in just a couple minutes. So, increasing ID success. So here's an example where one of our customers had a situation where they were dissatisfied with the percentage of calls that were successfully ID'd in the IVR. And 17% of total inbound call volume was ID'd in the IVR, and they wanted to increase that. And among other things, increasing that would give them the ability to enforce eligibility for service for those that were currently under a service plan versus customers that were not. And so, with an analytics solution, it was easy to drill down to the actual interactions and learn exactly how and where and why customers were struggling providing the information that the IVR was asking for. I mean, the IVR was trying to get the customer to identify a major product family, just to narrow the kind of universe a little bit. And once they had identified a major product family, they were asked to provide a serial number. And the serial numbers were, as you might expect, lengthy and alphanumeric, and so challenging in an IVR environment. So not only did we, by drilling from failed IDs down to audio replays of those customer attempts, we're able to identify the specific failure modes that were causing ID to fail. But then, by following those calls off to agents and observing how the agents ID'd the caller, what we found was that agents followed a completely different process to identify those customers. And among other things, they didn't use serial number. And so they had, they were able to pull up a phone number, for example, and from a phone number identify the customer's product. So we found a couple things going on here that were insights into how the solution could be changed. And so the flow, the IVR flow was changed to match the methods that the agents have developed to quickly and easily ID callers. Frequently that's the case. For any transaction you try to put in the IVR, chances are agents have developed over time the fastest way to get that done. And so, in terms of dialogue design, sometimes the way to get a transaction done is to really understand, how do the best agents get it done. They have developed a pretty refined way, a series of steps, a series of questions, a way to ask each question can be extremely insightful. So at the end of the day, this company saw their ID rate in the IVR jump from 17% of calls to half of all their calls. And since they did, in fact, transfer this information onto agents, they actually saw average handle times fall by 27 seconds, which is an enormous number. And I think at this particular company, a reduction in HT of 27 seconds translated into something like $25 million in annual savings. This is enormous. It's enormous. All right, let's go to second example. And this example is a problem where IVR was misrouting calls, and every time the call was misrouted, the first agent essentially had to repeat the work of the IVR. Why are you calling? Let me get you to the right place. And so the first agent's call was just wasted. I mean, if the IVR had gotten it right, we would have had one call instead of two, right? Because they would have gotten right to the correct agent. So this problem with a high number of misroutes causes a high number of transfers, which drives up calls offered. And of course, from a workforce management standpoint, more calls offered is not a good thing. So what we discovered by using analytics here was to drill down into why were customers making the selections they were making, and then when the call got to the wrong agent, how was that agent able to correctly assess the customer's need, and what was in fact the correct skill that caller was trying to get to. And so if you look at the language that the first agent used to discern the right skill, that language was completely different than the language that was in the IVR menus. And so this is this concept knowledge problem that we talked about earlier. It's when you're so close to something that you're not even aware of how your process knowledge sort of creeps into the application and creeps into the menus and creeps into the scripting. And so something that sounds perfectly obvious to all of us at the company, and everybody here who's placing test calls, it works exactly as we expect to it. It can be a foreign language to customers. So we had that problem. And then we had the problem where, in the interest of customer satisfaction, the IVR was practically begging customers to zero out. And so, the changes here were to, have the application work in the ways that the customer thought, how they think about their need and their question, their transaction, not the way we think about it inside the company, and to be a little less aggressive in essentially, promoting or advertising the opt-out option. And this was a huge success. Transfers cut in half, and think about that for your workforce team. If you could take that, make that big a dent in calls offered, it's an enormous success. That's really the end of it. In terms of the presentation material, I very much appreciate everybody joining us today and all of you that took time out of your day to be here. At this time, what I'd like to do is to turn it over to Larry and see if we can't take some of the questions that you all have typed in and asked during the course of the presentation. Larry?
Well, thank you, Joe, for that very, very fine presentation. I would like to mention to everybody who attended the session is that you will get a link to the recorded version of it by the end of this week. So if you'd like to listen to it again, go right ahead, obviously, and also pass it on to your colleagues. And as far as the questions are concerned, please use the Q&A box on the lower right-hand side of your screen to send us your questions and avoid using the chat box. We have several questions, Joe. The first one really is a clarification on something that you had said in terms of advertised opt-out. Do you mean hanging up or a direct route to an agent?
Right, direct out to an agent. So an advertised opt-out to us, as we describe it, is a situation where the IVR, the scripting of the IVR actually tells the customer, you can get out at any time by saying agent or by pressing 0. So we've advertised the opt-out option in the application, and what that does is it's promoted as a direct route to an agent. A lot of times what it does is it goes to a second chance menu, and, the menu says, okay, well, you want to get to an agent, let me ask one more question. So, a lot of times it's not a direct route to an agent. It's a second chance menu. And the surprising thing, or maybe not too surprising, but the second chance menus rarely work. Somebody who wants to opt out. They don't want to deal with another layer of menus. And so it can be a direct route to an agent. And I think the key thing here when you're looking at application structure and what to do is, if somebody opts out, where are you going to put them? And there's a couple of really interesting schools of thought. It gets back, again, to where your company is on this continuum of sort of enforced usage of the IVR and cost versus, sort of service and high touch. If somebody opts out, we can either put them in the most likely queue. So if 60% of your calls are billing calls and somebody opts out, well, throw them in the billing queue. 6 out of 10 chance it was a billing call anyway. So you could do that. What that does is it rewards the billing callers because they don't deal with the menu and they get right to the billing queue, and it penalizes. It's a poor use of the agents in that queue to essentially just redirect those calls elsewhere. So the alternative strategy is to have essentially a small group of call directors or operators who basically say, let me help you get to the right place. And then hopefully, customers learn that you can't instantly get somebody who's going to ask you a question. You're going to have to help us get you to the right agent, whether you do that with an operator or do that in the IVR. So there's a couple of different ways to handle that. But we're talking, when we say advertised opt-out, we mean an agent, a caller, pressing 0, or saying the word agent because the IVR has told them that they have that as one of the options that they can use, while they're navigating.
Okay. In the interest of skill-based routing, how do you balance 35 queues fed by a single toll-free number while minimizing the number of reprompts at the IVR?
Well, that's a huge issue, and so 35 queues. And versus reprompts, read that one again.
Okay, in the interest of skill-based routing, how do you balance 35 queues fed by a single toll-free number while minimizing the number of reprompts in the IVR?
Okay, well, I think, look, you can disaggregate calls and disambiguate calls into 35 queues without a huge number of reprompts. I mean, the number of reprompts is not because you have a large number of queues. It's because the questions you're asking aren't understood or the responses you're getting aren't what your application expects. So, there's two very different, things going on here. One is how do you design an IVR to disambiguate 35 different kinds of calls, and the other is, how do you ask questions in order to do that in a way that doesn't encounter a lot of errors and force customers to try over and over again. So, here's a case where analytics could be incredibly valuable because we'll be able to tease these issues apart. Generally, there's 1 or 2 or 3 different reasons why reprompts are going on. and that's a completely separate question from what's the most efficient way to minimize the number of questions to successfully disambiguate 35 queues. And there's many different approaches to that, too many to go into here. But again, it ties back to your company's position on where you want to be on sort of enforcement and low cost versus high touch and high customer service. And it can go all the way back to, is it really the right thing to do to have one toll-free number? So, that's a great, real-world issue that a lot of companies wrestle with, and one that analytics can bring some data to bear to that conversation.
Okay, thank you, John. Will this work with a voice over IP system? Let's expand this, and maybe you can explain what it does work with.
Great, thanks, Larry. Yeah, absolutely works with voice over IP. If you think about how our system works, we essentially, we're just in the phone network, and so the phone network or your caller, when your customer calls you, they don't need to know whether you have a voice over IP, SIP, TDM, doesn't matter to them, right? They pick up their phone, whether it be a landline or a cell phone, Skype, or whether it be, their cell phone, they place a call, and they don't need to know anything about, your technology infrastructure. Well, we're exactly like that because we're essentially in the phone network, and we are, you can think of us as riding along with your customer as they call you. So, our system is completely transparent. It works with any infrastructure, SIP, VoIP, traditional TDM, hosted premise-based, works with anything.
Okay. Would you recommend recording calls in the IVR if you're not using voice recognition?
Well, absolutely, and I think look, there's plenty of cases where touchstone applications can be improved as well, and plenty of touchstone IVRs have identification rates that could be improved, self-service rates that could be improved, misroute rates that could be improved. So the modality of how customers interact with your IVR, whether it be touch-tone, direct-to-dialogue, natural language, analysts can help in any of those cases better understand how customers are behaving and how to get more value out of the IVR system. And by the way, I think this is one area where I think the industry maybe has not always taken the best path, which is we sort of queued this idea up that you need to decide are you touch tone or are you speech, and in our view that's a little like saying do you want to use a hammer or a screwdriver, and of course in the real world you need both, and you need both for different tasks, and so it may very well be that if you have a touch-tone application and you're using analytics to really understand what's going on and you're searching for opportunities to get more value out of the IVR, you may find one question that, if powered by a speech application, would make a huge difference. You don't have to convert the entire IVR to speech, but let's say if you could just do address collection, right? And you didn't buy a giant speech license. You bought just enough speech ports that you could handle address collection in one module. That might be a huge win for your company. So, we don't see that the modality that you're using necessarily drives, the ROI for analytics. However, I will, I guess, put one caveat, and that is that if you're using natural language or speech, you're probably going to get more value out of analytics just because those systems have more ways to go to basically not operate the way you want. I mean, they're more powerful technologies. They're kind of a double-edged sword. They can work really well, but they can also cut you. So, there's usually more problems to fix in speech environments than there are in touch-tone environments.
Okay. How do you only record calls that are delivered to agents only and not extensions?
Oh, well, we don't. I mean, I'm sure there's ways to do that. Certainly with a premise-based recording solution, attached to your switch, that would be very doable. In our world, our customers really want to know the experience that their callers get. And so, if their callers are going to be transferred to extensions, they want to know about that. That's part of the brand experience. That's how we deliver service to that customer, to that caller. So, in our particular case, we don't disable it because that is part of service delivery, and it's important. And it's important in assessing whether the call was resolved and whether the customer was handled in a satisfactory manner. So we don't. Now, we do have the ability to essentially remove sensitive info, and so it is possible to configure the system to in the processing pipeline to essentially say, look, for this portion of the call, wipe it out and replace it with a tone because that's sensitive. So if you want, we can in fact remove sensitive portions of audio, and when that happens, the recording is made, and then during processing, the sensitive portions are wiped out, and so the sensitive portions might exist for a few minutes.
Okay. What can you do if you still only have DTMF and not speech to record? Your thoughts?
Well, I think there's tons that can be done. I mean, there's without getting into the specifics of this particular environment. Again, I think I've sort of maybe covered this in an earlier question. I mean, there's ample opportunities in touchtone applications. Now, look, if you have a small touchtone app, free choice. I mean, if it's really small, not many cues to disambiguate, no self-service, no identification, no desire ever to go there, then maybe you don't really have a system that that warrants putting an analytic system in place. But if you have an IVR system where you've got a large number of queues to identify, you've got self-service transactions, there's a goal to actually reduce misroutes, reduce transfers, do some partial self-service in the IVR to offload some handling steps from the agent. And if you want to do all that, then analytics can be incredibly powerful regardless of whether you're DTMF or speech.
Okay. We have time for one more question, Joe. Actually, this is kind of a twofold question. What needs to be in place to implement a system like yours? And how much time does it take to install?
Thank you. And you know what? I mean, we're happy to get into more details with anyone who's interested. What does it take to put it in? Well, it goes in rapidly because since we're in the phone network, it's really a couple of provisioning orders with your toll-free provider, and most providers, AT&T, Verizon, if you want to add a termination to a toll-free number or provision a new toll-free number, they can do those orders for you in a couple of weeks, maybe a week, and so that's it. Then we're running. So it's a fast implementation. There's no software, no hardware to install, at any premise, so it goes very rapidly. I guess the other, question to ask yourself is, you're going to learn. Think about that quote from the web replay slide, that talked about the web replay capability. You got to be prepared for some unexpected results and maybe some wounded ego. So you're going to discover things about your customers, about service delivery, about how your IVR works, about how maybe your partners are handling calls for you. You're going to discover some things that aren't known, that aren't expected, and that may be contrary to what people think. And so I think the other preparation for any analytics solution is to think about change management. And how do we get, leadership support for what we're going to do? How do we get the stakeholders that may be impacted to be brought into this and essentially be prepared to act on what we're going to discover? Because you're going to discover things you don't expect. And if the organization is prepared for that and has a, continuous improvement sort of culture, it can be incredibly powerful. But if the organization isn't prepared for it, it can introduce all kinds of funny dynamics, right? Some people don't want to hear that their baby isn't operating the way they've been telling everybody for years.
Okay, Joe, I'm going to put in one more question that we just got in because I think it's a very valuable one. One of our TF provider is a hosted ACD.
Yeah, it's no problem. It's again, we're upstream from the call being delivered to you. So if you think about, a telephone call, your customer picks up the phone, they place a call, the call is carried by the phone network, and it lands somewhere. And we are in the call before it lands somewhere. That somewhere can be a hosted ACD, it can be a premise ACD, it can be a partner that handles calls for you. It can be anything. But we are actually on the call before the call lands at a destination. And since we're totally audio-based, it just doesn't matter to us whether it's landing on an old Avaya switch or asterisk or something hosted in the cloud, completely transparent. And our system works in all those scenarios.
Well, thank you, Joe. That was our last question for today. I would like to mention once again to everybody who registered for the session that we will be sending you a link to the recorded version of it. Everybody have a great day, and thank you for attending. And thank you, Joe, for a very, very fine presentation.